If you're looking for visionary conversations that push the boundaries of everything you thought you knew, welcome to Conversations Beyond the Cutting Edge, where every month, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer invites two leading authorities from distinctly different fields to engage in a deep dialogue focusing on the latest discoveries, information, and insights on some of today's most provocative metaphysical topics. Here's your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello, welcome to part one of this Conversations Beyond the Cutting Edge, in which we're going cosmic and we're going to be smashing the embargo on truth with a two-part discussion on blue beings, star families, biological transfiguration, Russian science, autism, our DNA as portals to other dimensions, and much more, with visionary speaker, integration specialist, multidimensional communicator, and author of Awesomism, a new way to understand the diagnosis of autism, Suzy Miller, and Australia's leading authority on ET phenomena and author of the books Awakening and The New Human, Awakening to Our Cosmic Heritage, Mary Rodwell, who's widely recognised for her work with families and children who've had encounters with non-human intelligences. Mary Rodwell, Suzy Miller, welcome.
Thanks for
Lovely
having
to be
us.
with you, Sandie.
So a little bit of background on you both, just to, get started. Mary, you're a former nurse and midwife. You became a hypnotherapist, a counsellor, author, and founder and principal of ACERN, Australian Close Encounter Resource Network, and co-founder and co-director of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. Before I move on to introduce Suzy, tell us a little bit about how you got here and the overshadowing experience that changed everything for you.
Well, to encapsulate the journey from when I was a nurse and a midwife, and I can tell you right now that if you'd told me 45 odd years ago, or more than that now, that one day I'd be traveling the world talking about UFOs and ETs, I'd have probably sent you to the nearest psychiatrist. So it's been quite a journey. But I think the one thing that seems to bind us all is that seeking for truth. And the more that we go through life, I think that is the motivator. And from going from being a nurse into counseling changed a great deal, because I realized how important it was, emotional, psychological help was, and how you looked at healing. So for me, going into counseling, hearing a range of human experience, particularly when I went into grief and bereavement counseling, where you've got someone facing their mortality, seeking is the life after death. So all those kinds of extra journeys that I was making as a human being took me more and more into more of the multidimensional nature of reality. But I think the most crucial was not only recognizing by doing hypnotherapy that you could take people into not just this present life, but past lives, for example, and seeing the connection and journey of the soul was a revelation for me, because it opened up a huge avenue of not just lives on this planet, but lives on other planets as well. But it wasn't till a wonderful gentleman came to see me, heard that I was open-minded, and told me that he'd had woken up with marks on his body, shaved areas, and said it was due to his experiences on board craft, and that his family, his partner, and the children were also having experiences, and relatives wouldn't come to the house because they thought it was demons. And he said, "Can you help?" And I will thank Ellis Taylor for taking me down that rabbit hole, sort of, because it changed my life, because looking into that really was the catalyst for opening me up to an even greater reality than the one I was being exposed to, which is the whole thing to do with the star families and our connection on a soul level to them.
Suzy Miller, you're a former pediatric speech language pathologist. You have a master's degree in education, and you were catapulted into an entirely new career by a telepathic conversation with a 4-year-old non-verbal autistic child. Tell us a little bit about that experience. And, you know, the road has been very long from there to here. So tell us a little bit about that experience and about the multidimensional experiences you had as a child.
Yeah, so like you say, pediatric speech language pathologist having a very normal life, you might say, in the state of Maine. And I met a little boy diagnosed with autism. He had some verbal communication, but it was kind of more rote communication. When I met him for the first time, he was saying, "It's the millennium, it's 1999." And I, you know, thought he was a weird little kid, quite frankly. He was just showing up very differently. But what he did is he came right over to me on that very first day I met him. He looked me in the eyes and he said, "Master." And when he said the word master, something happened in my body. It was like there was some physical reaction to that word that was happening. I took him to the back of the daycare center and sat down in front of the door so he couldn't get out because he wanted to be with his friends and that kind of thing. And what happened next was transformed my life, quite frankly, um, in every way. He basically showed me his light body floating above his physical body. When I saw it through my speech pathology eyes, however, I had no idea what I was seeing. It was a little outline of his body. It just looked like bright light. And there was a little tail hanging off the foot of the light body, and it just dipped right down into the top of his head and just kind of dangled right around his heart. Had no idea what I was seeing, no idea what that was about, kept rubbing my eyes. And I finally asked the very logical question, "What the heck am I seeing?" And when I asked that question in my head, I heard a little boy's voice back. And he said, "That's my light body. You're here to put my light body back into my physical body." Had no idea what he was talking about, no idea how to do that. But he basically took me through a year-long process where he came to me through telepathy. He came to me through bilocation in my dreams, you name it. He was finding ways to find me, and he would tell me different things to do on his behalf. Um, and after the end of that year, he was completely verbal, meaning that he had functional verbal communication. And, if you had said to me, even maybe a few years before that, that my earlier childhood experience and that experience were all linked together, I probably wouldn't have seen it because, when I was a child, I did have these experiences where I kind of knew what people were thinking. I knew what people were hiding. I very frequently, as a young child, just said that out loud and then got ostracized for saying what was pretty obvious. I also had an experience when I was probably 7 or 8 where I felt compelled to go out in the front yard of our house, and I was looking up in the sky. And as I was looking up in the sky, I was, wondering where the children were. And I remember my mom coming outside and saying, "Suzy, what are you doing? You're just staring up at the sky." And I said, "I'm waiting for the children." And she was in the physical world. So she was saying, "No, the children are in the neighborhood. Go play with the kids in the neighborhood." But I had no way of knowing then that who I was waiting for was these children that were going to be coming from other worlds and other realities with other capacities, and that I would somehow have something to do with them. So, yeah, quite a ride.
You know, as I hinted at in the introduction, there's been a long-term embargo on truth. But now all of a sudden things are cracking open. People are beginning to speak and share. I mean, one example was Nancy Rebecca's interview with Pam Gregory when she talked about blue beings. And suddenly all these people were posting, I've seen blue beings, but I kept it to myself. And it's been happening to hundreds and hundreds of people who didn't feel that they could talk. What is going on that is encouraging people to be more vocal? What is actually cracking open that truth embargo?
Mary,
Well,
you want to go?
yeah. Well, the truth embargo, ultimately, we all realize has been going on for not just our lifetimes, but has been happening all through history, where anything that contradicted the consensus reality was frowned upon. And look what we did to anyone who was multidimensional. We burnt them as witches or whatever in the past.
Yeah.
The problem has been in terms of what is reality. We were, because of the Western society and the Western programming, is anything beyond your five senses wasn't acceptable as a reality. It's you making it up, your good imagination, or you're just downright crazy, has been put forward, for, many generations. So anyone having experiences like this, even, those that have come out as saying they're mediums or, or clairvoyant or whatever, was still got this, oh, it's all a bit weird and you're a bit strange, and are you sure you're not crazy? But what you were saying was, how has that shifted? Simply because I think there's been a whole activation going on a level which I think is unstoppable now, in the sense, I've talked to people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s that said they would never have spoken about their experiences as a child because it would have been completely dismissed and they would have ended up probably in hospital. Whereas now they've got this immense urge to speak their truth. And I think it's because we're reaching a point in our consciousness that has been activated sufficiently for people to no longer hide and be afraid of saying their truth. And I think this is overwhelmingly what we call this awakening that's happening across the planet. And there are many factors, I think, as part of that.
Suzy, you've been channeling the collective consciousness of the children for a very long time, and they've given you lots of information over the years that has come to pass. Did they ever point to this particular time in our history when it was really going to explode?
They didn't necessarily say like a date and a time or that kind of thing, but what they would say often is, we are the new humans. We are literally a new species. This is we're a whole different level of consciousness, you might say. And so if a whole nother level of consciousness is able to be born onto the planet, literally born through people, be born onto the planet, then the collective consciousness is going to go up, right? If we see ourselves as a whole and we're at a certain vibrational frequency, let's say, and then all of a sudden these children start being born first as kind of a trickle and then in a mass, then that alone is going to shift that vibrational frequency into another reality. And what they would say over and over again is that as there's more of us, who are, you might say, perceiving reality through a more unified field instead of the field of separation, more of humanity is going to be able to jump on that bandwagon. I don't think that that's the only factor by any stretch. I think that there's all kinds of shifts and changes that are going on. But to me, the very fact that these children were able to be born at this time, and as far as I could tell, hadn't been born in physical bodies since the time of Lemuria when we had light bodies, that very fact that they were coming in mass, I thought, wow, we're getting ready for some massive shift in consciousness because those kids can be here now.
Mary, you've said that there has been some help in upgrading our DNA, and these children, with the children that are being born now, those upgrades are presenting themselves in many cases as autism or neurodiverse in some form or another. If somebody is helping to upgrade, or something is helping to upgrade us, our DNA, why would they make it a challenge, for these children? What is the purpose of that?
It's a good question, Sandie. And when I wrote The New Human, the reason that it was important to mention the children's stories is because of how profound they are in terms of their understanding. What I discovered was those that had had contact experiences as adults, that was looking at a genetic line of connection to these intelligences we call star nations or whatever. And they were having contact themselves and often the grandparents, etc. It was coming down family lines. And what surprised me to start with was they'd say, well, my child is having experiences and what have you, and I don't understand. And they've been given labels, dysfunctional labels like ADHD, autism, dyslexic, Asperger's, and what have you. And I was faced with, well, why would that be if I was seeing an upgrade going on with the awareness with each level of generation? Why would we suddenly then get what appears to be dysfunctional children? They were given, obviously, they were given labels metaphysically of indigos, crystal children, children of light, golden children, all these different names from a metaphysical point of view, but were still given dysfunctional labels in mainstream. And I couldn't understand this. But what I found, along with beautiful souls like Suzy, was they had other abilities and awareness that was a lot more solid with them than the older generations. In other words, they were talking to these intelligences. They were comfortable with them. They saw them as family. They often interpreted themselves, even as a small child, as a hybrid, part star nation, star being, part human, and coming out with this extraordinary information and also awareness, where they would say, I can communicate with animals, I can communicate with plants, I can communicate with meteorites, I can change the elements, I can talk to the elements. Now, is this all, on one hand, is this imagination, or is this actually a reality? And there was no question that as far as they were experiencing things, there was something very, very tangible going on there. So how is it that they're seen as dysfunctional? And that was the interesting question. And I always remember a kind of light bulb moment when I was in Hong Kong talking to an experiencer called Neil Gold, who in his 50s said, now I'd be labeled as ADHD. I always saw a multi-dimensional reality. He was the one communicating with light beings, wrote the book Close Encounters of the ADHD Kind. And he then it kind of triggered, because what he said to me was, I would retranslate ADHD as always dialed into higher dimensions. So what I was then understanding is each of those so-called labels had certain abilities, certain multidimensional awareness that wasn't as common in your average normal human. So, okay, so why make it difficult? The thing was that we have all been so programmed by the 3D matrix into denying our multidimensional abilities that I believe, these intelligences made it harder to program them. And by doing that, they were then considered dysfunctional. But really, what it means is that they are literally always dialed into higher dimensions. And this is, and what do? We try and program them by giving them different medications to slow them down and slow down their frequency. That's what's being done. But actually, you don't need to do that. And in the book, when I wrote The New Human, there were protocols you can use, from extra vitamins and minerals and other things that you can use to stabilize that. But you have got these amazing children coming from all over the galaxies to help with different abilities and awareness that have come to this planet now to be part of this new awakening process. But they are given still these labels because, you know, the mainstream are not comfortable with abilities like with autism, the telepathy side of it, with autism, for example. You know, one of the interesting things with Asperger's that I found quite amazing was someone with Asperger's came to talk to me, and he said, they said to me, Mary, that we can't socialize. And he said, that's not true. Amongst ourselves, we're actually fine to socialize. He said, but what we won't deal with is the faces and the pretense of normal socialization, where people pretend to be happy or pretend that this is okay when it isn't okay. We say the truth. We say what we are seeing and experiencing. He says, and you can't handle that. You can't handle the many faces that you are taught to socialize with. So here is someone saying, we want truth, we want honesty, we want integrity. So each of these different so-called dysfunctions has amazing other aspects to it that we're not even beginning to understand yet. But when you look at the way they're understanding reality, it's showing us a whole new matrix of reality, which I think is what is the benefit and the amazing part of all of this awakening, is showing us more of what we are and what we can do.
You know, when the whole indigo phenomenon started, Nancy Ann Tappy, you know, back in the 70s, they were talking about indigo scouts, people of our generations, you know, that came ahead and in a way were preparing the way. Do you feel that this population, the current population of children, the ones that have, you know, been put into boxes and labeled because we don't understand their gifts, do you think that they are like a bridging generation and future generations won't be labeled in that way, and they'll be much freer to be who they are? And you can both answer this. Suzy, if you want to answer it first.
Yes, the answer to that question is yes, we are moving in that direction. But I also want to go back, if it's okay, regarding why these kids show up and it's presented as a challenge, like why it's so challenging. One of the things that the kids said is that, you know, they come in at a completely different frequency band. And the people that are identifying them as broken or needing of this, that, or the other thing are seeing them through a different lens altogether. They used to say, we come in kind of as these, in our totality, like in our spherical nature, right? We're coming in from that level of consciousness. And then you have people who have been conditioned to a very linear level of consciousness, looking at something spherical and saying, I don't understand it. I don't understand what that is. So that must be broken. The other piece of that is that when we start projecting all of this energy of you're broken, we don't see your skill set, we don't see your capacity, the only thing these kids can really reflect back to us then is that they don't have a lot of their own baggage, you might say. So what they end up doing is reflecting back what we believe about them. And it's meant to be reflected back so that we can see it in ourselves. But because we're as arrogant as we are, and because we're as linear as we are, we don't look at them through the eyes of curiosity. And we know this is true because the very moment that somebody who is a therapist or is a psychiatrist or psychologist or educator, whoever, physician, starts breaking through that kind of facade, like starts having curiosity, this same population shows those same individuals something completely different about themselves than the person that's seeing them through the lens of you're broken. Yeah.
Yeah.
And from the parental standpoint, there's not a mother or a parent alive on this planet that won't do something for their children that they can't do for themselves. And so as this child is born to them and they don't understand, and, you know, parents will open up to telepathy. They'll open up to the challenges that they've had in their own life that might have conditioned them out of their own multidimensional capacity. So they're willing to work towards that. And if the child just showed up multidimensional, you might say, fully communicative, you know, let's hit you on the forehead and make everything all right, there would be no internal growth process, right? It would just be like it just shifted, but it wouldn't be coming from the inside, which is where that multidimensionality always is.
That's very true, because when I was before I was producing Children of the New Earth, and I just had a section of it on Planet Lightworker, I used to get calls from grandparents, and those people, not the parents, grandparents, who would say to me, I never would have believed any of this spiritual shit.
Yes.
Except I've got this grandchild.
Yes.
And it's so different than anything I've experienced, you know, that it's opened them up and they're looking for answers. Yeah.
Well, I've had parents tell me over and over again, mothers especially, that even in utero, even when that child was, you know, being baked in the womb, that there was all kinds of spiritual experiences that were starting to happen for that mother. So the vibration of that being coming into physicality was enough to start to evoke some of the spiritual capacity that the parent might have covered up or been conditioned out of. So
Mary, do you have any experience of this or anything to add to what Suzy said there?
Oh, I can, everything Suzy's saying makes absolute sense to me, because I agree wholeheartedly with the wonderful way these children are reflecting to us our limits, and helping us to appreciate what's actually, we've sensed maybe on some level, in some ways, but the child has brought it together. I was only recently showing in a presentation a 7-year-old, who actually explained that she was a hybrid, part blue avian, part human, and she was describing how she does healing with the frequencies and what have you. And she says, and what I'm doing is I'm giving the person the ability to heal themselves. So here is this 7-year-old quite aware and describing in detail how she was doing it. And I realized more and more that once you bring in those frequencies, that frequency is not only embodied in that beautiful soul that's come in, but it's also, for those that are ready for it, it's being picked up by those around her. And this is what's actually part of this awakening, which Suzy's quite right, as far as I'm concerned. Every one of these new human generations are bringing in this awakening frequency, and they know how to tap into our consciousness and activate us so that we can expand as well. So absolutely, I agree with Suzy 100% on that.
Both of you work with children and you work with parents, and both of you provide information and support for those people. Where are you getting your information of how to work with the parents and the children? Mary, you can go first.
Well, the bit I missed out previously was about 30 years ago. I was invited by a group to learn how to open up more multidimensionally. And by that, I mean tapping into remote healing, energy work, connecting to what I call my team. Whether you call that your higher self, oversoul, or guides, or teachers, it doesn't really matter. It's what connects you to more of your own higher self awareness. And I found that after doing that for 3 years with a wonderful group of people, it showed me that everyone has that part to themselves that can tap into the multidimensional reality. We all have that capacity. It's often shut down very quickly, and it can be due to a religious limit, It could be due to an educational limit, scientific limit, or whatever. But bluntly, what it enabled me to do was to trust what I would call that inner wisdom that was coming through me, and also to recognize the source, which was really important for me because I consider myself very sort of down to earth, which is quite an amusing one, really, isn't it? But that's how I saw myself as an ex-nurse midwife, But what was wonderful about was I was realizing that I was tapping into a higher source of information and knowledge that was very useful, very helpful. And I could question it, I could get it verified, and that was really important to me. So when I started working in this field where I'm working with children and adults that also were opening up multidimensionally, it allowed me to understand how it worked. So I could understand when they said, well, I just get a sense of this, or there's just a knowing, or I get these downloads of information, and they make absolute sense. And sometimes they're things I don't know anything about. It could be quantum physics. It could be codes. It could be, pictures of different beings, or I'm sensing beings. I understood because I had spent 3 years working with that awareness with myself to the point where I could understand how it works. So I knew what to say, how to help them understand it, and often give them tools to do so. So my work changed not just from working through hypnosis as ways of getting answers, but assisting people to have a better sense of their own connection and how to work with it in ways that gave them confidence and whatever. So mine became through that learning, not because I never thought that I could ever do anything like that, because it was only other people that were gifted, as I put it. Everyone's gifted. It's just that they haven't realized how gifted they really are. And it's reminding them of that ability, reminding them that they can tap in to that awareness and that higher wisdom, whether they see it as their higher self, or, they're super conscious, or whether they see it as guides or teachers. Really doesn't matter as long as it's useful and helpful to them. But that's what's guided me with my work, because when I asked about all these so-called dysfunctional children, it was, no, Mary, they're not dysfunctional. This is really what's going on. So when you ask me where I get some of my insights, it's the team.
Mhm.
Suzy, you get a lot of your information from the kids themselves, don't you? They're telling you what they need, what to tell their parents.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and again, kind of like right after Riley, what I don't very often say, in interviews is that whole year that Riley was coming back and forth and was kind of opening my consciousness back up. I think he was opening me back up to what I came with, but that I had suppressed. And so I had all kinds of guides coming. I mean, literally physically manifesting, whether they were blue beings or whether they were somebody sitting on the end of the bed trying to teach me or remind me that I knew light language, or that I knew how to use laser hands, or it was just a crazy making time, because on the one hand it was so exciting to learn all these things or remember all these things, and on the other hand it was a little bit more than my little Suzy brain could handle at the time. But over the years, what's happened is, and I only know this in retrospect, honestly, Sandie, but what I know now is that that field of consciousness that is the collective of these new children, that's a vast field of consciousness. That field of consciousness holds capacities you know that most human beings don't consider that are available to them. And so as I started working with the kids themselves, they would expand me a little bit more, and they would expand me a little bit more, and there would be times where so much new information would come in again from that consciousness. It was like they were trickling it in, and I would like, okay, I can't work with you guys. And I would stop working for like a year, or I would stop working for periods of times just so that could get integrated. And then it would happen again. So I I like that it kind of happened that way as well, because it's left no doubt in my mind that that consciousness can help humanity evolve. It's helped me evolve. It's helped me remember skill sets that I didn't know I had. And so, yeah, to your point, very often if I ask them and just say, okay, these are the questions that we have for you, they'll just tell me. They'll just tell me what the answer is. I give that to the parents. What's been trickier is, again, because the parents have a certain perception of who their child is or who their child is not, there's also needing to be a little bit of an education between what the kids are actually saying and what the parent is hearing. And so, helping people to shift that the way they see these children has also been a big part of that. But it's also what has had to happen for me as I've been working with them too. So yeah, the information does come from them for sure. I can't tell the difference anymore.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a short break now. You're listening to Conversations Beyond the Cutting Edge. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and smashing the embargo on truth with me today are founder and principal of Australian Close Encounter Resource Network and author of The New Human, Mary Rodwell, and integration specialist, CEO and founder of Blue Star Education and Research, and author of Awesomeism, A New Way to Understand the Diagnosis of Autism, Suzy Miller. Still to come, who are these kids? Where are they from? Why are they here? What do we need to know about science in Russia? And is our DNA really a portal to other dimensions? Stay tuned.
Welcome to Om Times TV.
Hello, I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, host of Om Times' flagship radio show, What Is Going On? And as an author, editor and 13 times book judge who's read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors, I'm constantly asked what's really worth reading and what's not. So I created the No BS Spiritual Book Club to help you save time and money by picking the brains of discerning names who've walked this path before you. There's no catch, no fees and no BS. Just an ever-growing library of 10 best spiritual book lists from some of your favourite authors and teachers, plus free book excerpts, audios and video interviews with people like Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., David G., Lee Harris, Mark Nepo and more. From well-known classics to hidden gems you've never heard of, it's the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to enlighten your journey of self-discovery. So why not join the club? Get inspired and save money at the nobsspiritualbookclub.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene Keys is basically the code book of life. In the Gene Keys, the book is made up of these 3 levels: shadows, gifts, and cities. And the journey is through those 3 levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the city. And the cities are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Mary Rodwell, Suzy Miller. I'd like to hear about some of your experiences with the kids, who they are, where they're coming from, what they can do and why they're here. And I know this is a vast topic and you've both had so many experiences with kids, but, you know, if we could keep it fairly brief, because we've got a lot of ground to cover in this show. Mary, would you like to start and tell us about some of the experiences, what you know about why they're here and where they come from?
Well, Sandie, as you say, there have been many hundreds now of children that have talked to me about who they are and why they've come. And in this very room, to give your listeners a bit of an idea, is a young 8-year-old came into my room to tell me about his experiences. And by the way, the picture that you see, half of it anyway, on my wall, he immediately went up to that and said, I've been there. I see the planets. The planets are a bit bigger when I went past them. He talked about going into other galaxies through that particular Stargate. So I had that all interpreted in the space of a few minutes. He couldn't take his eyes off it. So he started to tell me, and I'll use this as the main one, is that he's incarnated from the mantis beings. The mantis are his ancestors. That when he goes on board craft, sometimes he evaporates. In other words, his consciousness goes into a mantis form. And he talked about going on board craft with 2 of his schoolmates. And he explained that when he goes on board, they're being taught how to complex information. And he described that there were other children. Some of them, I said, well, did they all look like, humans? He said some of them were like humans, but not exactly like humans because of big eyes. And he said, but we were taught to use our minds to do various things and taught very complex information. So I remember saying to him, complex information, can you tell me what some of that is? He said, no, it's too complex for you. And then he proceeded to tell me, I said, did you ever talk to the children that from your school that weren't up there with you? And he got very agitated and very upset. And he said, no, because he said, I couldn't talk to them. I wanted to, but Mum wouldn't let me. And then Mum piped in and said, well, I didn't want him, appearing strange or weird. So I was trying to protect him. So this gives you a bit of an overview of one child and their experiences and how they're trying to manage their multidimensional experiences with everyday life and what's expected of them as a human being. And that's pretty classic with many of them. I remember one 12-year-old explaining to me that when she goes into the classroom, she said the teacher's saying one thing, and if it's inaccurate, my blue guide and my friend tells me, don't listen to that. That's not accurate. This is what you need to know. Another one of 13 saying to, she said, my teacher is often, she said, talking about things and saying things to us, but what she's saying and what she's thinking are very different. And often what she's thinking isn't very nice. That will give you a bit of an overview of how it is for these amazing children that can tap into your energy, tap into what's going on with you, your motivation. And this is the problem for them, is living in a world where so much isn't coming from a truthful place and an honest place. So that's what comes over time and time again, is the disparity between their reality and the reality they're taught is the one they should accept.
Suzy.
Yeah, First, I just want to say, Mary, I still concur with that because I've heard this over and over and over again where children have so often said, it's like, why would we want to verbally communicate when people think one thing and say something else? It's very confusing to us when we're trying to bring that language through. And why would we do that? One of my favorite stories is around the kids is I was working for a while. I kept hearing different children who I was working with. They would say something about the timeless nature of our being. And that's a big esoteric concept, a philosophical concept. I didn't really know what that meant, but I just kept hearing it. Look into the timeless nature of our being. And I kept asking, it's like, I don't quite understand what that means. And so then I had a young 16-year-old woman, nonverbal speller, come with her mother for a session. And her mother said to me, my daughter wants you to help her be, help her be better at her job. She doesn't want you to tell her not to do her job or to back up from her job. And I said, I won't tell her that. And what's her job? And this young woman knew that she was the kind of soul that when children on this planet were calling out for support for one reason or another, that she was almost like that angelic presence that heard that call and supported, right? So she said, so we were having this conversation and she said, I just need you to help me energetically make that easier. So she was taking me multidimensionally through what I could do to support her energetically. And I was changing things, tweaking things, whatever. During the time I was doing that, all of a sudden I said, this is so interesting to me. I said, it's like whatever we're doing here energetically is going to help you help these children have a voice when they need it the most. And I said, and I find that interesting because here you are, you don't have your physical voice, but you're going to be the one that's going to help them have theirs. And as I was saying that to her, I thought, I said, when I was 16, I had an experience where a very authoritative kind of stepfather had me down on the ground and he was yelling at me and poking at me. And at the time that happened, all of a sudden this energy just came up through me. I poked him in the chest and I said, you have no idea who you're talking to. I ran upstairs, laid down on my bed, and that was all the energy I had for it. And I said to this young woman, I said, it's like that. Like you're going to be that energy that comes through somebody and helps them stand up for themselves. And then all of a sudden, I got it. Something hit me. And I said, oh my gosh. I said, wait a minute. I said, were you that energy? I said, I know you're 16 now, and I was 16 then. I said, but were you that energy? And she's a speller, so she's clicking out on this board something that her mother is going to have to verbally communicate to me. And she typed out, I have known that I was here to support the children of this planet. I knew it before I came into a body, and I still know it now. And I was very happy to be of service to you.
Oh, wow.
I was like in a flood of tears. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there's no time. The timeless nature of our being, whether we're in a body or out of a body. The fact that I was 16 at that time, she's 16 sitting in front of me. She hadn't done that for me. I wouldn't be doing this with her. She wouldn't be helping all the 16-year-olds that are yet to come. And I thought that was a very functional way of understanding the things that the kids have been saying up to that point, which is look into the timeless nature of being. And these kinds of experiences have just been ongoing Yeah, through these kids.
I mentioned earlier about why are they here? Well, I think you've already told us why they're here. What I'm curious about is when they become parents,
Mm-hmm.
what is our world going to be like when they are running the show?
Mm-hmm.
Mary?
Oh, wow. Well, I think we're very close to that already, in the sense that if I'm, what I'm seeing and sensing myself and so many others are, that we are at a very, very close to a crossroads of, an activation that is going to change consciousness forever and change the way that we see reality forever. And I think that these beautiful new souls that are coming in are prepared. They're prepared, and they're preparing us, the older generations. The older models need a bit of waking up still. But we've all got that ability. I think it's a world that we can't even begin to recognize yet, because it is going to be so incredible. I know I've sort of tapped into my team sometimes saying, give us a little bit of snippet, of what this, and they're saying, you can't even imagine, Mary, what this is going to be and how it's going to be different. But all I know is that it's transformational as a human consciousness, that in every sense of the word. And in a way, it's nice not to know too much. All I know is that with these new ones coming in, when they can connect to all around them, whether or not it's a plant, whether it's an animal, whether or not it's a crystal or whatever, if we can connect to all and each other in a completely different way of understanding, how, can you even begin to imagine how that will change our reality and our consciousness and our understanding of our connection to everything? I mean, it's going to be mind-blowing as far as I'm concerned. And I always remembered a wonderful ufologist gentleman who said he'd been up on the craft, Commander Robert Dean. Those in ufology will know who I'm talking about. I met him a number of times. He'd admitted he'd been on the craft before he died. And he said, they have shown me the future of humanity. And he said, and it's glorious, was the word he used. And you can interpret that how you like.
Suzy, I mean, beyond the future of humanity when it gets glorious, and I have heard this from other people as well, we've got several generations to go, I would imagine, before we get to that point. What is your view of what's going to happen when these children, are becoming parents and raising a whole new generation? Because, all we see at the moment and all that's in the media at the moment is all these kids who are saying, well, I'm non-binary, I'm this, I'm that, and people can't quite get their heads around it. So, how does that unravel when those kids are sort of in their 20s and 30s and thinking about possible procreation?
Mm-hmm. I think what's interesting is, again, I think the dilemma right now, anyway, is still that we have this very linear consciousness trying to engage with what the kids always say is a spherical consciousness or a unified field, a unified consciousness. And so to me, there's before it's glorious, and I agree with Mary wholeheartedly, that's exactly where we're going. And some of the interim steps is really breaking through some of that old linear consciousness so that it can become more spherical, so that we've got these fields of energy that are multiplying, you might say, instead of working against each other. And so on the one hand, it's like, I always ask the kids, it's like, okay, what's it like to be in a unified field? What's it like to exist in unity, truly? And it's like, well, why do you think we can read minds, or we can help people heal across time and space, or we can do these kinds of things? It's because there's no separation between ourselves and anybody else. It's not just, and that's where humanity's going. It's like, and in the in between stage, we really get to learn that what we project out vibrationally, we actually get back. And so it's kind of like, for those of us who are still kind of, using our training wheels, you might say, we are learning that, yes, we are vibrational beings first. We are all connected. So it makes perfect sense that what you put out, you get back, kind of thing. So I think that there's this breaking down of old conditioned realities. I think there's this opening up into greater states of, or higher states of our own consciousness. And as that happens, and those children are co-creating or procreating, right? Then you've got that field of energy just multiplies that much bigger. Yeah. When that will happen, I don't know. What I do know from the kids is that even in the beginning of this year, they were talking about, we're going to be able to land now. We're going to be able to fully be here. And the more fully they're able to be here, the more information we're getting about what it is to be unified, so that those are ready to pick that up or picking it up. I just think it's going to be an exponential expanse of capacity. Yeah. Of what our human capacity actually is.
Yeah. And it's probably impossible for most of us to even begin to think about that, because we haven't been stretched enough yet, to take it all in.
I'll give you an example, Sandie. One of the things that parents ask me all the time, especially about children who are nonverbal, is, well, what kind of jobs will they have? Will they be able to have relationships? And every single time I ask the kids, they always say, you have no idea what kind of jobs that we can have, or what kind of expressions we can be in the world, because you're not there yet to receive it. You haven't opened yet enough to know what we could offer humanity as our quote unquote job. Yeah.
And that is true. And that's why we have such a hard time.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's why
I'm
that's why we
afraid.
see them as disordered. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm afraid we're out of time for this episode, but we will be back in 2 weeks to have another conversation. So I'm glad that we're going to have a chance to continue this, because there's so much more to say. We haven't even touched yet on Russian science, genetic engineering, DNA as portals to other planets. So do join us in 2 weeks' time, when we'll be back with part 2 of this show. Mary, Suzy, thank you so much for joining us today.